It's Wizards versus Lesbians, a podcast for your ears.
Hello, and welcome to Wizards versus Lesbians. My name is Isaac.
I'm Alexis.
And today we are discussing Daughter of Mystery by Heather Rose Jones. Which of us should do the plot?
I will do the plot.
Alrighty.
The Baron Savetse is dying, and he has left most of his fortune to his niece, young Marguerite, who would really rather, instead of getting married, would really rather become a scholar and study saintly mysteries and magic. Along with his fortune, he has also left his custody of his ward, Barbara, a cross-dressing duelist who the Baron has raised to be his servant and bodyguard. And if Marguerite does not accept Barbara, then she does not get the fortune. And so now these two young women are going to have to learn to live with each other and deal with the very angry Baron's actual heir, new Baron, who feels like he has been disinherited and wants revenge.
Indeed, I would only add, because it's such a significant detail, that this story is set in the fictional country of Alpenia, which is in real Europe. And the best way that I can describe this is fantasy Liechtenstein.
Yes, this is exactly what I was going to say.
It is a terrible little Middle European principality under the Habsburgs.
Somewhere between France and Germany.
Yes, and we're this is just post-Napoleonic Wars, so we're in the early to mid-19th century, which is an exciting time. But this country is sort of like behind the times because it's a terrible little Middle European principality. But
Yes.
That's very important to know, that this takes place in the real world, except this is a fictional country, and also real Catholicism, except it's magic.
Yes.
But having said that, that sums up the plot. This is the first in a trilogy of books about daughters that we're doing, or books called Daughter or Daughters of X,
Yes.
which are going to get increasingly harrowing as we go along.
Pretty much, yes. We're starting with this one,
gentleman,
which is nice and tame, and is just sort of... This one is... this is sort of... I think of this as sort of... This is from the mid-teens, the mid-20 teens. And I feel like the sort of late aughts, mid-20 teens is this period of time where the internet has made small gay presses newly viable, while, sort of breathed new life into them. But gay speculative fiction hasn't quite hit mainstream yet. I mean, 2013 is when Ancillary Justice arrives on the scene. And so, the mainstream presses haven't quite caught up. And so there's this interesting... You get some really interesting books from this era, from, Leith Press and Bella Books, which is what this one is. I believe that the Dana Ingram one, All Good Children, is also from this era.
Yeah, that tracks to me. But let's move on with our rubric. Yes. Are there wizards in this book?
There are.
There are. And I think there is, even though he's not one of the magic users, I think that the old Baron is 100% a wizard by our standards.
Yes. And there are also actual wizards.
Yes. Are there lesbians?
Absolutely. These are our two heroines are very classic lesbians.
They certainly are. And are they in conflict?
Yeah, both the Baron is definitely somewhat in conflict posthumously, but also there is in fact a big magical conflict that happens, or there's a big political conflict that happens between some of the other wizards and Marguerite, who turns out also to be a wizard herself.
Yeah, there's a genuine wizard battle between some wizards and a lesbian. So
yes.
This is absolutely wizards versus lesbians in pretty much every sense. Why should you read this book?
I think if you want a sort of very charming, sort of classical Regency influenced lesbian romance with some magic and some sword duels, Like, this really is, you know, I feel like this checks a lot of boxes and is, well, it's not groundbreaking necessarily. It's just deeply charming, I found it, despite the Catholicism.
I agree. I mean, I was somewhat concerned about the Catholicism when I was thinking about how you would take this book, but yeah, no. Not only is it like classic, lesbian romance, but it's also classic yuri. Like this really hits all the beats of a yuri manga in a really specific way, which I wasn't necessarily expecting, and as such, it is to me comfort food.
Yeah.
I just found this book extremely relaxing. Like the peril is never too perilous. Everything is, I mean, there's obviously like, conflict, but it's the conflicts that we understand are going to happen under these circumstances. And then the next, and then the next beat comes in, you're like, haha. So yeah, I mean, if you're an enjoyer of this kind of thing, which I am, it's this one, it's really well executed, and also it just veers off into some strange and interesting places occasionally, like the whole like constructing spells around like Saints' Day feasts and the sort of the architectural structure of spellcasting, plus the historiography of it. Actually, a lot of thought went into it. I found it really interesting. So
yeah,
thumbs up. But why shouldn't you read it?
Well, for one thing, it sort of posits a world where Catholicism is real and magical. And also, I really want to know what happened to the Jews in Alpenia.
You don't want to know what happened to the Jews.
I don't want to know what happened to the Jews in Alpenia. But and for that matter, where are the Jews in this real Europe that has Catholic magic, and how are they doing?
On a similar note, like this is one of those classic. I mean, this is when you're thinking like a romance novel, which this is. There is a certain like, okay, where's the underclass? Because like there is a class conflict in this, like the classic class conflict in this book, but it's between very rich and extremely rich.
We can get into this more because there is a fun thing that the book does where it sort of flip-flops the class conflict near the end.
Yeah, which I really enjoyed.
Yes, me too.
But also there is this thing that kept coming to mind while I was reading this, which is like, how upset am I going to get about the fact that this upper class woman is denied one thing and then she gets it,
Right.
It's sort of it's which is a theme that we may revisit as we go through this trilogy of Daughters books. But it is one of those things where it's like you really just sort of have to imagine that this is a world with no problems and no, and like that everything that's happening to these aristocrats is the most interesting and important thing, and et cetera, et
right.
cetera.
No,
so.
this is true of basically any kind of Regency romance. And honestly, my experience has been that people who try to write Regency romances that are class conscious, they tend to be kind of terrible.
It ruins it because like this is escapism. That's what it's supposed to be.
Right, this is escapism, and there's basically no way that you can convince me that these people are inherently virtuous, no matter like how much they wring their hands over the family plantations. And so really just not having them. And so like really the way, I kind of prefer this, even if I do wonder where the Jews are, because it is better than trying to say all the right things, but not being willing to actually admit that you can't have a Regency fantasy romance that has any real social justice underpinnings, unless, you're just burning down the entire system and at least politely dismantling the entire system and replacing it with democracy.
Yes, and we're very interested in maintaining this system. All the good people in this book are. So
yes, and so you really just gotta if you can't do that, then you already aren't going to be interested in reading this, because this is very much inspired by Regency romances, and that is fine.
The other thing that I will say here is that there is a real selection of just absolutely awful names on display in this book. I don't like reading them. I don't like saying them. But I think this is also accurate to the part of the world where this book is set. So, It's just that horrible middle zone between French and German.
See, I loved that. Not because I would, ever want to be named any of these things or, but I really enjoyed how terrible the sort of French-German naming conventions were.
Exactly. It's not really a reason not to read it. It was just I was just alarmed by it initially. If it were a fantasy setting, I would be like, stop. But, I'll just add a few of them in here, jingle wise. Yes. There's Aunt Honorat, Aunt Bertrude, Sister Petronelle, Moritz Fulpe, and Laurent, who's practically engaged to Mari Fakremek, and that's just within 3 pages.
I will also note, as far as like the quality of the book goes, it drags in some places. The pacing is not perfect. It's not. This book aims at the middle and hits it very squarely, and occasionally has flashes of something more interesting. And
I agree.
That's, and I can appreciate that. So
it led me to expect the middle and to be pleasantly surprised when the interesting things happened, basically.
Exactly. So, but this is not, there were places that I was kind of bored.
Yes, no, this is absolutely the case. Although, shall we head into, let's see, content warnings before we head into the spoiler zone? Are there any? There's like attempted sexual assaults.
There is attempted sexual assault, yes. And there's attempted sexual assault, and the resolution to that is that she decides she's going to, if there's attempted sexual assault by a cousin, and she decides that, she'd rather keep the family together and she makes peace with the cousin. So
yes, which is extremely in line with the book's general philosophy also.
Yes.
So if that isn't to your liking, you may find this book extremely annoying.
So, though I think that there's something a little bit more interesting there than we're giving it credit for. But
yeah, I'm totally willing. Perhaps that should be the discussion that we get into immediately.
Yes.
Post spoiler zone. Spoiler zone.
All right. I can't think of any other than Catholicism.
Yes. All right. So let's go into this. Our hero's father, uncle. Our hero's uncle is like he is the archetype of the bad patriarch here, because he is. I mean. Yes.
He is our hero's father. He's our other heroine's secret illegitimate father, but right.
Oh no, I wasn't talking about him. I was talking about.
We're talking about Marguerite's other uncle. Yeah, that's also her uncle.
Marguerite's guardian. Yeah.
Yeah, he's her uncle.
That was the aforementioned Moritz Fulpe. Yes, no, the wizard is actually, I think, not the model of the bad patriarch, because it turns out that even though like his motivation, actually I really like the way that they handle him.
I thought he was very well handled, including the fact that Barbara's justifiably angry and never quite forgives him.
Yes, which is I think actually entirely correct. But
yes,
but let's put that aside for the moment. So her guardian, who is like the boring bad patriarch, whose crime is not only that he is being a patriarch, but that he's kind of stupid and tasteless about it, and prideful. Is his big plan is that in order to get his family's hands on the giant inheritance that his niece has just gotten, he's going to marry her off to her cousin, his son. And so he basically says, hey son, go in there and court her, and if that doesn't work, then sexually assault her, because that...
No, he doesn't actually. He says court her and really convince her, and his son, who's also stupid, goes, oh, well, the one way that she definitely won't be able to back out is if she's been sexually assaulted.
Yes, but I mean, this is entirely it's made clear that this isn't like a freak awfulness in this culture.
Right. No, it's very apparently, one thing I think is actually interesting in this culture, and well depicted, is that people just talk about this as a fairly common hazard of, oh yeah, sometimes you want to marry rich and she's not interested, and so but she's friends with your sister, and so she's visiting your sister and you rape her and now she has to marry you.
Right. Like and you don't even have to rape her. Like
Right, you just have to be in private with her.
right. The values of the society are if you manage to get yourself in a compromising position with the eligible bachelorette, even if nothing compromising takes place, that can be enough of a hit to her reputation that she has to marry you or else be faced from expulsion from society, which is the worst thing in the world.
Yes.
And so he probably didn't even have to go as hard on it as he did. But
right.
as you pointed out, he's an idiot. So,
well, also, of course, he's her cousin, so just being alone with him wouldn't necessarily compromise her in the same way.
Right,
but also,
exactly.
more importantly, he's an idiot.
Yeah, but also marrying her cousin would not be weird in this society.
Right.
Or if weird, mildly weird, rather than the kind of weird that it would be now.
Yes.
Because this is Habsburg Europe, and cousin marrying is the foundation of their government. So,
well, also, I mean, again, this is I think this is basically true of gentry, because these are most of these people are untitled gentry.
Yeah, no, I mean the Habsburgers are The Habsburgs are like the most visible example of this, but it's definitely an as above so below sort of a thing.
Yeah.
But so you were saying that there's a little bit of it's more complicated than I'm giving it credit for. So in what sense?
Well, okay. So obviously the idea that obviously her cousin is terrible, and that she forgives him is terrible. But I'm not 100% sure that the book thinks that I'm not 100% sure that the book disagrees with me here. Because the result of her sort of forgiving her cousin and being like, well, that was an awful, embarrassing fight for us to have had, but I will forgive you and we will move on past this and you'll never do this again, is that he convinces her to join this secret society of wizards, which almost gets her executed for treason. Like, at no point does making up with this guy and do anything good for her other than get her access to some scholarship and study buddies that is very intellectually fulfilling for her until they try to get her executed for treason. And because at the end of the book, she rejects her family. She spent the entire book trying to hold on to her family and make peace with her family, even when she's rich enough that she's just got to put up with them for another 6 months and then she can tell them all to fuck off forever. But she keeps trying to hold on to these family bonds. And then at the end, this is classic Wizles, queer desire is, liberatory. The fact that they want to separate her from Barbara makes her decide that she's going to, that's when she's willing to tell her family to fuck off. And and at this point, we're all pretty convinced that most of that, she should be doing that with most of her family because they're awful.
No, you're absolutely right. I think that the way that I was thinking about it was this is one of those, the way that women actually, this sort of that arc kind of marks the political arc of the book too, because it starts as being this is a society in which women do wield power, but as eminence agrees, as sort of, the powers behind various, dull-witted men, or by being regents or, or through their children. But the actual sort of the end of the political arc of the book is that the mother of the two sort of German princes who would otherwise have become king actually becomes princess of, or prince and princess, because this country actually isn't a monarchy of its own. It's a principality. It's a principality, but it ends with the king's or the prince's first wife being named the successor because
not the prince's first wife, the prince's daughter by his first wife.
Daughter by his first wife, right? Again, the family.
So the political there is a political situation here, which is that the prince is the prince / who's the ruler of the country. His first wife, all of his sons by his first wife died, and his daughter married some German royalty, and then he remarried a French woman, and her son is a kid. and he's dying. And so now it's, are we going to go with his grandchildren, his daughter's children who are German, or are we going to go with his underage son and his French wife?
Yes, exactly. And our little principality does not want to give up sovereignty in either direction. So what are we going to do? And the solution that is lit upon is to actually make actually make his first wife's daughter the which, as I said, sort of mirrors the arc of her own life, because it goes from like she being like, okay, we're going to go along to get along, and I will wield my influence while still being relatively demure and submissive in public, to no, actually, I'm going to tell all of you horrible people to fuck off. And it's like the sort of the emergence is that women do actually have some power to wield, but their freedom is very, circumscribed. And so we're actually going to come out of the shadows and claim that power directly at this point.
Yes. And I mean, it's also very clear that the thing that, because also this is also mirrors kind of what happens to Barbara, where she spent her entire life living out the extremely convoluted whims of this one man, who she has idolized her whole life. And then he dies, and he reneges on his promise to set her free. And she's tied up to this woman young woman her own age. And then she also, she gets her freedom when, she gets access to, as it turns out, her illegitimate father's title, and she becomes the new baron or baroness. And so really, in both of these cases, they get this freedom. And part of it is that, they are in love and willing to tell the rest of the world to fuck off. But it's also, one of them gets a noble title and the other one gets a ridiculous amount of money. And it's a lot easier to defy, and the book is pretty clear that it's a lot easier to defy your society's restrictive gender roles when you have a fuck ton of money.
Yeah, no, as I said in the intro, right. As I said in the intro, what we have here is a sort of a situation of like, oh, the injustice is that I'm a hair's breadth away from being the overclass, but I'm disqualified by my genitals, and justice is me getting to be part of the overclass.
To be fair, we do get to see some glimpses of the underclass. And again, this book is not invested in making us. This book is mostly invested in is showing that at all this book is very invested in the oppression of women. It's not particularly invested in class oppression, but it is, because it's interested in the oppression of women at all different levels. You get to see the different ways this plays out. So like you get to see how you get female and male scholarship students to the university, but the female scholarship students have the male scholarship students, this will actually open up the world for them. And for the women, it's okay, you're either going to be a governess or a clerk. Yeah, no, we are the systematic nature of the gender inequality in the society gets a good, thorough look over. Yes.
But it does all turn on the gender of it all, which I think may be true of every book with daughter in the title.
Yes, well, to some degree, if your book's very title is defining women by their relationship to other people, particularly men, then clearly you're interested in that.
Yeah, and this isn't a bad point to make. I mean, even in 2014, this isn't a bad point to make. I just want to make that clear.
Yeah.
It just means that you are definitely focusing on one thing, and it is at the expense of other things that you might be talking about.
Yes.
But let's talk about the old Baron.
Yes.
How did you pronounce his name? Savizzi. I thought Savizzi.
Savizzi, because it opens with the book, ebook at least opens with the author's note on pronunciation, which says that the letter Z is pronounced Z, as in German.
Oh, excellent.
I don't actually know enough German to know whether or not that it is as in German, but the letter Z is definitely pronounced TS, and so it's Savizzi, clearly.
That's excellent. I also had the ebook because there's no audiobook of this one, but I skimmed right past the paratextual materials like a fool, but Alexis clicked their tongue at me there, but it didn't read. Baron Savizzi it is. I really like this old bastard.
He's so awful. He's great. Yeah. And the fact that he continues to sort of dominate and mess with the narrative, like in the last few chapters, is kind of fantastic.
he's got all of our classic wizard behavior tropes, like the withholding of of very important information, particularly,
Yes.
and like controlling information beyond his death via contract.
Yes. And his,
that's-
and like this, yeah, this sort of obsession with immortality. In his case, it's very much with, metaphorical immortality. He's pretty upfront that he's dying, but he's still so obsessed with like controlling his legacy, like every detail of his legacy, and screwing over his enemies who are also dead.
Yes, or it's like everything he has done out of spite.
Yes.
But and one of the things that he does out of spite is that he sets up a contractual Yuri situation.
Yes.
Which is one of my favorite Yuri tropes. Like, by law, you two must, be together at all times and live in the same house and all of this, or else you don't get $1 million.
Right, which is just great.
And I think he must know about Barbara and her proclivities,
Oh,
right?
he obviously does. I mean, he's not stupid, and Barbara's had several girlfriends, including what's her name,
The
Jeanette
least
or
discreet
whatever.
girlfriend.
Right, exactly.
In the history of girlfriends, the woman who aspires to be shocking, which I think is one of my favorite little descriptive moments, is that
Yes.
some guy describes her as, in the same way that she's aspiring to be French, she's inspiring to be shocking, but falls short of it and is merely eccentric.
Definitely she's another of my favorite characters because she's so much what she is. Like, she's this woman who married a French count, and she's not French, but having married a French count, she decides she's going to be more French than anyone else has ever seen.
French is inheritable and also transmissible sexually. So,
Though fortunately for Barbara, I guess they were using protection.
Mon Dieu. I just woke up and see what has happened.
Yes. But anyway, so yes, clearly the Baron knows that Barbara's a lesbian. Because he's extremely observant, and my guess is that he actually suspects that Marguerite also is, because he's gotten to watch her. He got to observe her at the party, and he knows, and every time he meets her, he can tell that she's entirely uninterested in getting married.
Yeah, no, I think that clearly he set this specific deal up, knowing what would happen, or at least strongly suspecting what would happen, and I think that not only did he do that in order to sort of roundaboutly keep the money in his own family, but I think that he was also just sort of like, oh, this will really piss a lot of people off.
Right. Yes,
I think
exactly.
That's at base level what his motivation is.
Yes. So I actually, because again, part of what makes this such classic Yuri is, of course, the fact that Barbara she's not disguised as a boy most of the time. But she dresses up in men's clothing most of the time, and she's a bodyguard, which is an almost entirely male occupation.
Yes.
And a duelist. And
she is the butch, but the butch also turns out to secretly be the princess, or not the actual princess, but a baroness, which is a fun twist.
Yes, but I love the explanation because you always have to have your reason. Why is this girl dressing up in boys' clothing? Like, is it like Utena, where she wants to be a prince? Is it like
Right.
Oscar in Rose of Versailles, where her father really wanted a son? And no, in this case, it's largely her terrible cousin tries to sexually assault her.
Oh, that's right. There are in fact 2 cousin sexual assaults here.
Yes, and her guardian, the terrible, the Baron wizard type, says, "All right, I give you 2 choices for how we're going to deal with this," because he also hates his nephew. He says, either I will make sure that you are never alone with him again, ever. You'll just be surrounded by protection always, or I will get you weapons lessons. And you can...
She's like, weapons lessons.
Right, and she's like, absolutely, weapons lessons. And she turns out to be really good at it. So he's like, great, now that you're a teenager, you're going to be my duelist. That'll really shock everyone.
Yeah, and I mean, the other thing about this is that so the the nephew who he hates at this point is like 15, and he already hates his like little shit of a nephew at this point.
I mean, to be fair,
I mean,
his
admittedly, he's a
15-year-old nephew
15-year-old
did just try to
rapist,
rape
but
his
still.
daughter, so.
Exactly. He's not wrong. He is a little shit, it turns out, and a big shit when he grows up. But but he gets his.
He gets his.
But yeah, no. But despite us, rooting for him, and you can see why Barbara like respects him, for treating her like a human being, in certain ways.
Sort of.
Exactly.
He also makes her ask permission to speak every single time.
Yes, he's a complicated figure in that it's probable that he gave her that option just because he thought it would be shocking and like annoying to people that he had done so, and also that it would result in his nephew being beaten up.
Right.
Which
it does.
But like it's clear that he also sees her mostly as a pawn, and
yes,
also she is his biological daughter, as we discover later.
Yes,
and,
as which she does not know until he's been dead for almost a year.
Not only does he not tell her while he's alive, he makes arrangements as such that she will not be told after he is dead until she figures it out for herself. Until she figures it out for herself,
or she reaches her age of majority, because the entire point of this is for her mother is so that she doesn't inherit her mother's husband's debts, because then it's possible that the Baron could be sued through her, and the Baron would rather raise his daughter as in complete ignorance of who her parents are, as a cross-dressing duelist servant, than be sued for debts which he could totally cover, and it wouldn't even be a major hardship.
Right.
He'd just have to sell off one of his tertiary properties.
He is a classic control freak, wizarding, sociopathic asshole.
Yes.
And the book doesn't let him off the hook for this, as you say. Barbara still hates him, or is still angry at him after she figures all of this out. But the sort of the mixed tenor of it, it's like his sheer, spiteful manipulation is what has made it possible for them to be in the position that they're in.
Right. Also, he's really entertaining, and so you, the reader, are kind of rooting for all of his horrible, spiteful manipulations.
Right. It's the kind of complicated feeling about the wizard that is making me think of our oldest and most beloved Wizlas books, like from the stuff that we were recording back, or that we were covering back at the origin of the series, where it's like
Belthandros
or John.
Yes.
It's like one of the things about those books is that they are really wrangling with the relationship between the wizard and the lesbian, because we want to keep some of his cool ass shit but we also need to acknowledge that he's horrible.
Right. Well, it's also that that's part of what makes a good Wizlas book work, I think, is that you have to see why this sort of terrible quasi or actual parental figure, why they have such an emotional hold over our lesbian heroine. And
exactly.
So you really have to be able, and the way you can pull this, when this succeeds, it's by making the wizard genuinely compelling and interesting narratively, while also making him sufficiently awful that on one level you're kind of rooting for him for his schemes to succeed because they're so entertaining. At the same time, you're rooting for him to be defeated by the lesbian protagonist because he's so awful to her.
Right, exactly. And this is when I get up on my high horse about like every male in this book is a horrible caricature. It's not just me being defensive because I'm a man. It is also, it's a more interesting book when people are complicated,
Yeah.
And not just the male characters, but the way that if the feelings between people can be complicated because the people themselves are complicated, that also makes for a more complicated and interesting book, which actually kind of brings me to a real candidate for token good guy, Lefebvre.
Yes, the lawyer. Token good guy, yes. And a lawyer, so.
Indeed, like a real diamond in the rough, this guy. And French to boot. At least if his name is anything to go by. Yeah, no, this guy just straight up is he's just great.
Yes,
And
he tries so hard to
for so little reward.
like, well, and the thing is, like his flaw is that once the Baron is dead, he's still carrying out this guy's terrible, spiteful whims, but he does everything he possibly can to like to find loopholes.
Like a good lawyer, yeah.
Right, yes, like a good lawyer.
Yes. There's a lot of waggling of eyebrows and nudging in various directions, which Barbara is initially too, I think, proud probably to try to bind on.
Yeah, too proud and also like still too upset. She's lost her father figure, and did not get her promised freedom, which is like the thing that she's been waiting for her entire life.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I should say in a completely understandable way, but she does eventually cotton on to what he's trying to nudge her towards.
Yes, and then she figures it, and then she puts all the pieces together, which is that's really satisfying when finally the lawyer gives her the documents and is like, so are you going to open them? And she's like, no, this is going to work way better if I slam them down dramatically unopened at the court in the middle of the court. And he's like, so you figured out what's in them? And she's like, yeah, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, no, that's actually really great. Not only because it makes the moment more dramatic in the event, but also
like you get to really appreciate her showmanship there.
Yeah, she's a great character. I mean, they're actually, Barbara and Marguerite are both really great. Like, they're both complicated and interesting.
Yeah, no, and their dynamic is really good. Like, I really felt sold on their dynamic when Barbara finds out that, in fact, she is not going to be emancipated, has a panic attack, is waving her sword around, and Marguerite is, like, talking her down as if she's some sort of wild animal in front of everybody.
This, too, is Yuri.
Right? Like, it's such a nice classic Yuri moment. And, it's so dramatic, right? She's got her hand around the sword blades, like she's cutting her hand, and she's like saying all these soothing things, and you're just like,
it's just great.
This is great.
Yeah, this is classic stuff.
This is this is the stuff of a classic Yuri romance right here. You've got your,
and then like as that romance progresses, it's like they're each bumping into each other's pride.
Yeah. And
in classic Yuri fashion, and also into each other's like stupid, selfless gestures in classic Yuri fashion. I think I really like the way that like the ultimate like, I can't talk to you about this in person, but I'm going to make the ultimate romantic gesture that you'd better like take me up on, or is I'm going to buy your debt.
Right.
Like, again, very classic sort of, this is a very lawyerly book in a lot of ways, in addition to having a lawyer hero in it,
Yeah, there's a whole lot about, like, complicated feudal debt law going on.
Yeah, financial instruments, weird inheritance law, like, it's weird, like, actually studying legal textbooks is part of the plot. Yeah, it's very nerdy also. And Marguerite, of course, is nerdy as well. She wants to be a scholar, but she's also sort of a scholar, mathematician, theologian, philosopher, because she is a Catholic intellectual.
She's a Catholic intellectual in a world where Catholic right can, in fact, do magic.
Indeed. I like the way that's, irrespective of how one might feel about that, about the larger implications of that, I thought that the way that it was handled was pretty cool. I liked the sort of the way that the qualia are, not only that the way that the qualia are like, sort of have been scientifically noted down, and like a scholar's vocabulary has been raised around this sort of esotericism, but also that the main church thinks that's heretical. So actually this is sort of like, it's esoteric Catholicism, not like, the mainstream Catholicism has the juice. I'm assuming that it hasn't been fucked with too much. This book would have hated Vatican II.
Yes.
It would have fucked with all the magic. All the magic would have been ruined. But the way that but the way that her way of understanding the puissance of the faith is very much not in the mainstream of the church.
Yeah. And actually, one thing I liked about the magic system is that there are people like Marguerite who can sense magic and thus are much better at it. But it's largely a matter of learning that, people who understand the theory can still construct these magic spells. They just can't tell if they're working or not until they see the results.
You may have noticed that we like books where magical talent isn't strictly hereditary. More than the alternative, they seem to have better politics. You wouldn't have thought of this one either. Right, so which is why even these sort of people who would probably be pretty sexist and snobby are interested in having her around because she can actually tell them whether it's working or not.
Right.
Oh, speaking of which, I loved the baronet's or the new baron's sister is also a character who is very cool.
Oh yeah, no, she's really interesting, especially because the book really very obviously sets her up so that you think that she's going to be a villain and side with her brother when it comes down to it. There's several times they say, "Oh, you can never trust the sister," and she never does. Actually, she does the right thing pretty much throughout, and then at the end, she's like, "This does not make me not. You still ruined my family, and I hate you, but."
But my brother is an idiot.
But my brother's an idiot, and I'm not going to let him get
Yeah.
away with treason.
And he has actually ruined the family also. Right. Or did his level best to. So.
Yeah. No, but it's just, I liked that because it's a great example of, okay, she's somebody who is going to do the right thing, but this doesn't mean that she's going, she never actually, Marguerite spends the entire book trying to be friends with her, and the end result is, no, I'm not even going to continue being sort of cordial acquaintances and study buddies anymore. Even though I understand that it was not your fault, I'm still too resentful of the way that you played a part in destroying my family.
Yes, indeed.
There's a lot of good, interesting women in this book.
Yeah, and
and several interesting
and some
men.
some good interesting men too. Yeah,
Yeah.
I liked the sort of the penniless aristocrat, the broke older unmarried aristocrat who was like, ooh, a maiden aunt, you say?
Right, a maiden aunt with an extremely rich niece, so I can finally get out of my parents' house.
Yes. Oh my God, the poor man, but also is extremely he goes above and beyond to make sure that it's very clear to everybody and also legally binding that he's not doing this to try to get his hands on her money.
Right. And also, he's very upfront about, what he wants. And he's like, look, I'm not in love with you and you're not in love with me, but I think we can get along pretty well. And I will be a really good uncle to your niece. And he does. He follows through.
These are, relationships between adults, and it's you could definitely see some actual, affection blossoming there.
Yeah.
Because he seems like a cool guy and she is actually being kind of, giggly about it. So.
Yeah. No, and I mean, I think at one point the aunt who marries him says, look, I think actually that some real affection can grow between us, and I'm willing to give it a try. And he steps up even when his new niece is accused of treason. He steps up and uses the one bit of noble privilege he has access to so that they can't seize her house.
Yes, he's a very convenient aristocrat for them to have on board.
And he's so upfront about, yes, my role here is to be convenient aristocrat. I can initially I can introduce you to a slightly higher class of eligible young men. And we can hold slightly classier parties, and then later that becomes, well, I have a small amount of privilege that can be used to shield you from the worst of the treason charges. So,
yes.
And also, actually, the other bodyguard, because Barbara's like, I cannot be your bodyguard 24/7. I need to sleep. So I'm gonna hire a second, subcontract this out, and he's actually another good male character.
Yeah, no, really, I cannot call this book misandrist, despite my my usual habit of doing that.
No, I mean, this book is very, well, although this book is very interested in the oppression of women, it's much more interested in the way that society can work to oppress women in different ways. This is not a radical feminist, women are inherently virtuous, men are inherently evil.
Which, I mean, and that makes sense in its preoccupations, which are largely, as we've said, the law, you know, social mores and, you know, and rules of various kinds in magic and in mundane life. This is a very rules-based system that we've got going here.
Yes.
As I think is accurate for the time.
Yes.
So I possibly one of the most yuri scenes in the book is when, due to the machinations of the world's Frenchest non-French woman, they go to an opera together. And they go to a lesbian opera together,
yes,
which you have in 19th century Liechtenstein. But in fact, it is based on, I looked this up, I somehow hadn't come across this, the real Greek myth of Iphis and Ianthe. Iphis having been raised as a man for reasons and then falling in love with this woman and then is transformed into a man by the gods. Which is apparently, there's a couple of different versions of this myth in sort of the Greco-Roman sphere, which I didn't know about, and so I was like quite happy to find out about it by what's the word that I want?
From reading a fantasy yuri novel.
Yeah, sure. I guess there isn't really a way to compress that into a smaller thing, but yeah, no, I sorry, I Iphis is the daughter of Ligdus. And I really had to struggle with myself to see whether I was going to try to bait you into a Ligdus nuts joke or something, but
you were not going to succeed.
I decided against it. Yeah. But yeah, no. So that was fun. I don't know if that actual opera exists.
I don't either, but you know, like that's a plausible subject for an opera.
Absolutely, absolutely. No, I do not think, at least if it does not appear in the Wikipedia article, so I do not think that, although apparently some chancer once claimed to have to possess a manuscript of a Shakespeare play based on it, which scholars have treated with intense skepticism.
Alas, perhaps in some other universe.
But, you know, I think that this would have been a good subject for an opera. Of course, there is an Iphis and Ianthe opera now in the modern pseudo-serialist style, which you might expect from 21st century Australian composers. I actually like that style, so, you know, check it out.
It is great because it is a perfectly plausible subject for an opera, and thus we are able to have a perfectly plausible all the lesbians at the lesbian opera scene. Yes.
I mean, what more can you ask for?
Right?
So yeah, that was both fun and educational. You talked about the pacing earlier. I was actually kind of gratified about the pacing because there are a lot of balls, as one might expect for a book of this period. But it does not treat. We do not have to actually spend a lot of time at all of the balls because the book is about as uninterested in the balls as Marguerite is.
And that it was a good choice on the part of the author.
Sometimes we stop to handle the balls, and sometimes we just skim right over them. I'm sorry. I'm setting myself up for for a jingle.
I figured you had to be. I was trying not to laugh, but I failed.
It's fine. Well, I'm upper class high society, God's gift to ballroom notoriety, and I always fill my ballrooms. The event is never small. The social pages say I've got, ladies and gentlemen, the biggest balls of all. You just go listen to the song. No, I am actually trying to make a point, which is that it doesn't when nothing important is happening at one of these functions, we do not linger.
Yeah.
We get straight on with the plot.
Yes.
So what were the points that dragged for you, I guess?
So the points that dragged for me, I thought it took a little bit too long to get to the will and to the two of them, living together. It's like, come on, hurry it up, get me to the Yuri. And like, especially because like we know that this is where it's going, right? And so
yeah.
It felt like a drag. And I mean, I guess that does fairly effectively capture the sort of sense of somebody's dying, and it's not like we necessarily want them to die, but nothing can move until they do. So, it does a good job of putting us emotionally into the place of these characters, but still, the book doesn't really start until he dies. And the other place where it dips is when they're studying and she's joined the study group and they're working towards the mysteries, because it gets a little bit repetitive. It's like, okay, Barbara doesn't like this. Marguerite doesn't care. There's some tension building between them, but it doesn't like come to, build to anything where we have to like really deal with it yet. And so it just it feels like it drags a bit where, again, we know where this is going. Where this is going is that something bad is going to happen as a result of this study group, and she's going to get in trouble. And they're going to have to flee to the convent because that's already been set up. And we just have to wait. And like, and there's some side plots in there which help a little bit, like that, but the relationship doesn't, like the maiden aunt and her husband, and I guess this sort of back and forth with, is she going to forgive her cousin or not? But because there's no progression in the main plot or any of the side plots of like sort of figuring out, Barbara figuring out her identity or development of Marguerite and Barbara's relationship, it feels like we're sort of stalled out for a little while.
Yeah, no, I think that like, if I'm remembering that point in the book correctly, I think that the thing that kept me interested during that part was actually the fake scholarship. And by fake, I mean, like, it's fictional scholarship, right, but real within the universe. Because I actually was kind of fascinated by I mean, it's clear that the person who wrote this book has done some archive digging, in her life, and and I was just like, I was actually interested in sort of the way that this philosophy was built, so that kept me interested during that period.
Yeah, that's fair. I think part of this is that this is my second or third read of the book when I did for the podcast, and I was like, okay, I know how the world works pretty much, and just nothing, and like nothing is happening. No, there's no real relationship development with any relationships other than some very peripheral characters.
This is true,
and it's also that we spend a lot. This is a time where we spend a lot of time on Marguerite, and Barbara's just sort of fretting on the periphery.
It is, yeah. No, it was unfortunate because in the earlier going, we had the Barbara goes down to the docks to meet the illicit bookseller.
Yeah, that was great.
Subplot, which kept happening, which I really enjoyed. So, and that's also like the only actual like physical action that you get in the book during that little area. So,
because that's, because there's the thing where the debtors are sort of where the debt collector, who's pretty sure he knows who Barbara is, but without her getting any, until proof of this is developed, he can't actually collect on the debt, and so he's trying to like scare her and intimidate her so that she'll figure this out. And that's all great, and I just wish that maybe there'd been a little bit more progress on that front, or Barbara had to get into a duel for some other reason. Just give Barbara something more interesting to do when we're like gearing up for other than fret, when we're and pick minor fights with Marguerite that don't really lead anywhere yet. While Marguerite has got something to do. Maybe I just wanted more sword fights.
Yeah, no, there was a little bit more too much fleeing and too little sword lesbianship.
I feel like we had such a good sword lesbian. Like Barbara is such a classic sword lesbian. I wanted at least one bit, and I love legal drama. Trust me. I mean, I wrote a dissertation that's deeply rooted in legal drama. But if you're gonna give me that good of a sword lesbian, you got to give me a couple more. I want a big dramatic duel.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I also dug the. I think it helped once the shit actually hit the fan, and I liked the monastery or the nunnery or whatever you want to call it bit.
Yeah, me too.
The sort of the getting the deal from a woman with Alzheimer's who is like actively mean about it. It's like you find out from your mother who your mother was from a person who hated your mother and thinks you're her mother. You're the mother.
He thinks you're the mother and that your mother was a whore.
Yeah, that's just really fun stuff.
Yeah, that was great. I thought it was a really nice beat where like everyone seems to really love them and support them, and it's clear that like they're in love. And so Marguerite makes the completely understandable assumption when she tells one of the nuns, "Oh, well, we can't stay here because we want to be together." And watching the nun just like completely shut down on her and be like, "Oh, never mind. You're not welcome here anymore." Is great. Like that's a great beat of, oh sure, everyone is fine when you're acting like it's a schoolgirl crush, but as soon as you try to make people treat it like a serious relationship, then suddenly the nuns hate you.
This is tangential, but am I right in thinking that one of the reasons that Lefebvre is like,
oh, he's gay? No, because his no, it's obvious because his quote-unquote manservant or whatever is clearly his boyfriend, because there's this thing where he blows up at either Barbara or Marguerite being like, "You are not bringing my boyfriend into this." He doesn't say boyfriend, but like it's really clear.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't, making too much of that. But
no, that's obviously what's going on with Lefebvre, and it's clearly like that's also why when Barbara's off crying in the garden or whatever because she's had a fight with Marguerite, like that's clearly why he's the one who's like, "Yes, look, you're in love. You've got to deal with it."
Yes, it's great. Again, it's solidarity.
Hey, this is some classic Mlam Wulu solidarity.
Thank you. That's a much better way to pronounce that.
Also, so let's get to the sort of reversal of fortune, because I think it's really interesting. You get to the moment where in another book it would just end, but instead you now have to deal with, okay, so it turns out, because, one of the real tensions in the book up until now has been that Marguerite is an heiress and Barbara is a servant, like quasi-slave in this feudal system.
Right.
And then you have your big dramatic thing where Marguerite is off the hook for treason and Barbara's been revealed as truly the Baron's daughter. And then the book keeps going because it turns out that that doesn't solve things, because now Barbara is penniless but is titled nobility, and Marguerite is rich, but she's she's just like untitled gentry. And so now, instead of everyone being like, "You can't have this woman around, she's a scandal," it's, "You can't hang
you can't
around
have this woman around, she's a gold digger."
Well, no, but it's you can't hang. Now it's instead of you can't keep her as as like your pet crossdresser, it's you can't be the pet of this cross-dressing baroness. Like
exactly, exactly.
And and that's the moment where she tells, where the aunt is trying to be like, well, and it's actually great because the aunt isn't freaked out that Marguerite is a lesbian. Presumably by this point she kind of figured it out. I mean, she's shocked, but she's not shocked, and so she immediately switches into, well, you don't, you can't get married. And so what, you're just going to be a mistress for the rest of your life? And Marguerite is like, yes. And so I want to be treated like a mistress. And that means you don't turn my girlfriend away at the gate.
Right. This is great stuff. And yeah, no, they actually have to, there's the role reversal. So which means they both actually have to, confront what it means to be in those specific situations, and forced into understanding each other's point of views, and also there's that point where Barbara is assuming that this is how it's going to go, so she pretends that she doesn't know Marguerite in public, and Marguerite is like, "Oh no, that's not how we're going to be doing this.
Right.
You know, I'm not going to live that life. I'm sorry. And
Right,
you know,
and like Barbara's doing this to protect her, and Marguerite's like,
Right,
no, it's fine. You can throw away my good name. I have enough money that it doesn't matter. I've already made friends with this woman who is basically doing the same thing and also pretending to be French.
Right.
And so, like, I have a model for how this can go.
yes.
And
Have you heard the word eccentric that's been bandied around for this entire book?
right, and I like that how it ends is like, yes, Barbara is an eccentric, and she had her female companion, and everybody was like, welp, given who her dad was, I guess it was bound to turn out this way.
Yes, it's the Savetsa tradition.
Of just being really weird.
Yes, exactly.
So, and like, that was also nice. Like, clearly the book reached a point where it's like, okay, we've actually wrapped up all the threads. So we're, even the ones that, it wraps up more threads than you would expect this kind of book to do. And then it just stops. It's like, okay, and now we're going to spell out exactly how they live happily ever after in like a paragraph, and now we're done. Which I thought was, that was a good decision.
I often complain about authors who don't think it through, and it's like it can in some cases be distracting and unnecessary to really, dig out all the ramifications of the world that you've built. But in one like this, which is so heavily based in reality, it's just like a little bit off, basically. It's very important that the author actually thinks about the implications of everything that they've set up, and this author does that to a T. So, again, really exceeded my expectations.
Yeah, and like despite my qualms about my quibbles about the pacing, I was really impressed with the construction otherwise, because everything does get everything gets set up with extremely obvious foreshadowing, and then every sort of loose end is carefully tied, and then it just sort of ends with a big bow, and it's like, look, perfect. It's just very well constructed, and not in a super exciting experimental way, but in a, you set yourself up a fairly nice little puzzle and you resolved it very well.
So, with that being said, do you have any last notes? Of all the weird names in this book, Barbara may be the weirdest one. Why would you name your daughter Barbarian if you didn't want her to grow up in pillage?
No, I think we've actually pretty comprehensively covered this one, and the things that I liked and the things that I didn't like.
Yeah, no, I was suffering there for a moment with some of the stuff that we had been doing lately, and this one was really refreshing to me. So I am glad, and it is also preparing me for the horrors that lie ahead. So there's your preview of the next couple of episodes. Yeah. So
yes. So next time we're going to be doing what? Daughter of Chaos?
Daughters of Chaos.
Oh, is it Daughters of Chaos?
I wish it was daughter. I wish it was either daughter or daughter daughters, but it's daughter daughters. Oh
well,
you can't have everything.
I know, but yes, okay. Daughters of Chaos, which was a reader request.
Sam, I'm going to have words with you about this, because although it is extremely interesting, I'm having the worst possible time.
I gotta say, well, I'll have to say this again when we get to the actual podcast. If Saya didn't have a really good track record with recommendations, I would have noped out of this one like halfway through and probably been happier for it.
And after that, Daughters of the Coral Dawn, which is classic lesbian separatist science fiction from the 80s.
Yep.
So the misandry meter is going to go way up.
Yes.
All right.
All
so
right.
So look forward to all of that.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay, I guess we've got to do this. I've got big balls, they're such big balls, they're daddy big balls, and he's got big balls, and she's got big balls, but we've got the biggest balls of them all. Ugh. Okay.